Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you an interview that is a little bit different to my previous ones. If you haven't watched those as of yet, you can find those on my channel under my Dead Matter playlist. And if you have been keeping up with the team at QI Software, you will know that they have hired some new developers in the recent past. So I kind of wanted to catch up with one of those guys rather than what we would call maybe the old guard. So I hope you enjoy the interview, guys. And if you do, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel and perhaps checking out my Twitch stream. I stream every day of the week, 2:30 PM UK time through until 8 PM. Thanks guys, and enjoy the video. Okay, Disseminate, tell me a little bit about your role within the team. What is it that you do for QI Software?
Oh, I'm a programmer. I program. And that could be anything from gameplay programming, back-end. I guess I'm more or less brought on as a journalist right now. So I typically do a lot of behind-the-scenes programming as well. So that's stuff like the database, networking, UI, trying to prevent crashes, doing some automation tools, that sort of thing. I'll often do a lot of gameplay code like weather, building claims, VoIP, electric and water, that sort of thing. And I also do the website. Okay,
awesome. Thank you very much. So I think it's fair to say you do a wide range of things then.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Whatever.
Yeah, of course. So, how did you get picked for the team? What initially took your interest about the project?
Oh man. So Nick and I go back quite a ways. I met him when I was something like 14 or 15 or something like that.
Wow.
We started out modding for Gary's Mod. And, at that point in time, it's really easy to discover new servers and to find new game modes and that sort of thing and to write, different add-ons. So we bumped into each other a couple times. Like I'd see him post around some forums, or he'd make a game mode and I'd host a server, or vice versa. So, we just did a ton of game modes back then. We chatted and whatnot. So he showed me, I remember when he first showed me the mod Dead Matter, and that was way back. But we both quit modding around the same time just because of how limited it was, I think. Personally, there was, modding is great for enhancing a game like Fallout or something like that, or Gary's Mod, but you can't really do anything bigger with it. You can't make giant worlds, you can't make anything that's super interactable or anything like that. So we both sort of went straight to game development right after that. I personally, I was doing my undergrad and I finished that, so I went into industry immediately and just did some web dev, and I think Nick just kind of doubled down and made Dead Matter. And so it's been a few years. I did some web dev stuff, and then game dev was always kind of like my hobby on the side.
Yeah.
I'd work with Unreal Engine and that sort of thing, and a couple other engines, and just sort of doing hobby projects and I guess side stuff like smaller games, but all sorts of stuff. So I think that he knew I was working on that for a while. We'd chat about stuff. He'd ask me problems about Dead Matter, and I'd ask him problems about my games, and so on and so forth. And so we kind of were developing our skills with Unreal at the same time. And then around December of last year, he just said, "Hey, we need another programmer. Can you help out for a little bit?" So I said, "Sure." And so I did some work with the team. And then a few weeks ago, he asked me to come on full time. And so I said, after having a look at the game code and talking to the rest of the team and, seeing ideas bounce around behind the scenes, I was kind of convinced that, this is a good project to be working on. So I said, "Hey, you know what? Why not? Let's do it." And I gave my 2 weeks notice 2 days ago, actually.
Wow. That's awesome.
That's exciting times.
Yeah, I really like every time I speak to one of you guys, I really like how far things go back for each of you. It really kind of, I guess, inspires confidence for the rest of us, because we know that you guys have this background. You have this experience, for you that's coming from a modding background. You already have known Nick for years and years, which is obviously a big thing when you're working together day to day. And I think it just reinforces that whole thing. When I speak to everyone on the team, you guys always seem like you get on with each other. I'm sure you've had your challenges, but
for sure, yeah.
It's just that you guys seem to click really well together, and to work on that project together is a really promising sign, I think. So that's awesome to.
Yeah, we have a lot of different, pretty varied experience. Nick and I both did Gary's Mod stuff, as did Nomad, I think. But the entire team's had different. Like, we have a ton of people who did Fallout 4 modding. We have a ton of people that just did sort of like creative industry work with animation and that sort of thing. So yeah, it's a pretty diverse team, and I love it.
Yeah, I know Haxorus, I think, comes from quite a big modding background for Fallout, if I remember rightly, when I was speaking to him. And it's interesting as well that we mentioned that we go back to Gmod, because I was a huge Garry's Mod fan. I was huge Garry's Mod fan. Oh yeah, I've got like, I think almost 2,000 hours in Garry's Mod from back when I was like, maybe, I don't know, maybe like 13 to 17. Nice. Just many years back, but I loved it. I loved it.
Like, at one point, I think I was in the top 20 players for Garry's Mod. I have 14,000. Way
Jesus.
Too much time wasted.
14,000. That's crazy.
But it was fun, right? You learn. Yeah, it's how we learn how to program, right? You start off with just small scripts, and then you can sort of build on those and get better and better.
Yeah, it's interesting because even I delved into that world a little bit.
Nice.
When we were setting up our own servers, quite a few of like the frameworks and the schemas were quite, I guess, bare bones. So if you wanted to add something, you could, but it would require a little bit of tinkering and making it work with everything else.
Yeah, and it definitely helps when you're working on a team, I think, because with Garry's Mod and small scripts all working together, it's sort of the same thing as when you have a bunch of different programmers working together.
Yeah.
I mean, it's obviously a lot different, but there's still a ton of similarities that I'm seeing where people have to get their code to work together. There's some programmers will just, never work on a team their entire lives, and that's fine, but you do learn sort of how to interact with different people's codes and how to get all the modules to be working together as smooth as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good comparison, actually. It bewilders me every time when I think back. So like when I was 13, 14, all the way through my teen years, I used to play on the same server that Nick played on, and I didn't even know, obviously, until speaking to him about Dead Matter, which is incredible. Like it's just such a small world.
Absolutely.
But yeah, that's really interesting to hear about your background. So it's fair to say that we're gonna have a lot to talk about, I think, because obviously with the wide spectrum of stuff that you've done for Dead Matter and obviously outside of Dead Matter as well. But I wanted to focus on one key point first, which is multiplayer. How important do you think something like multiplayer is going to be for Dead Matter?
Well, actually, funny enough, like, I don't think it's actually going to be that important, to be honest.
Okay.
Like the game, we're sort of engineering this game to be both a single player game and a multiplayer game, and to have none of the weaknesses of both. And it's a lofty goal, right? Like, there have been other games that have tried to do that, but there are a few, instances of game code that actually let us do that really well. For example, Unreal Engine lets us do this really easily, because the multiplayer system that Unreal uses, basically, once you've written single player code, it immediately becomes multiplayer code in about 80% of cases. Like, all that's left is to add in, making sure that you're not networking something that's going to cause a lot of lag, making sure that, you're networking things to the right people. But realistically, once you've made a single player game, converting it into a multiplayer game is quite easy. So with Dead Matter, a lot of our systems can be run in single player or multiplayer. And with single player, it's fine, right? It's going to be fun. You're missing out on the shared experience, though. You're missing out on forming a group and, grouping up together and claiming a building or defending from hordes. But yeah, you can still do it, and you can still have a good time, I think.
Yeah, I would definitely agree, and I think that's a really interesting point, because I really didn't expect you to say that. I really expected you to say, like, oh yeah, multiplayer is going to be a huge thing. We want to have like quite a big focus on it.
I think multiplayer is going to be amazing, but if you don't want to play multiplayer, I don't think you have to, especially.
Yeah, I think with the Dead Matter world, the way that the AI is being developed, the way that there's a bit more going on outside of just the survival loop that we always see in other survival games. There's a lot more going on. There's a lot more depth. We've got like a whole background story. We've got interactables on the map. We've got AI factions and stuff like that. All these things.
There's the background story, and then there's the foreground story, right? Like, there's the entire story that's going to happen over the course of the years in game that go by.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Like, I think it's going to. this isn't just your average survival game. This is a survival game that has sort of been designed with story and immersion from the ground.
Oh man, I love it. I'm so excited. I can't wait. I'm a big single player game fan. I love stories. But I think it's fair to say that me and a lot of the community out there, people watching this video right now, that are big fans of the multiplayer aspect, and they loved that whole creating your own story aspect that survival games gave us. But over the years, we've just had not so many instances where we've been given a lot to do outside of creating your own story. Like, it was just, here's a map, go and do it.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's like, yeah, and that's what I think the game industry is missing at the minute, is a little bit more than that.
And I think that there's a lot of, like, instances of Dead Matter where you can take in the story as much as you want, or you can just discard it and just play a fully multiplayer survival game if that's what you're looking to do. There's nothing sort of forced on you, like in the more recent Fallout games, your progress and the duration of time in the world sort of is dictated by your quests. So you finish some quest and then the entire game world sort of like moves forward, but until then it's in this sort of steady state. Right. In Dead Matter, at least from what I can tell, I guess you'd have to ask Reggie a bit more about this, but the story basically just goes on based on time. So, 2 months might pass and so might happen. 4 months might pass and this event might happen. But it's never sort of dictated by you doing something. So you could go full Walden and just live in the woods for, a year if you wanted in game and just not pay attention to what's going on outside. And then you could emerge and the story is going to accommodate for it. So I'm super excited to work with the timeline system.
That's crazy. I'd never thought about that as well, like how you could literally, if you wanted to, just detach yourself from it entirely, because you're going to have other players as well that are doing all these other things, if you're on a multiplayer server, that is.
Yep.
And that can also affect what's going on. So yeah, I really like that. That's really cool. So one of the other big aspects that I learned recently was that you worked with the VoIP for the game. Because this is something we've seen used in the recent vlogs. I kind of wanted to touch on it a little bit. So tell me a little bit about the features that we're going to see in the VoIP system for Dead Matter.
Sure. So in Dead Matter, VoIP is, I guess, it's treated exactly the same as any other sound. So if there's audio that, an NPC yelling or something like that, it's going to be the same as you talking in VoIP. So you're going to be able to alert the horde. You're going to be able to do anything that, traditional sound could do. And it's all a part of the immersion, right? Like with VoIP, like if you watch the most recent vlog, you'll see that there's some reverb effects. There's some spatialization of the VoIP and everything. It sounds like it's coming from in-game. And we're trying to keep that sort of immersion factor going with the whole system. So I guess it's more treating the whole thing as like an aspect of the world, more so than just a tool to communicate between players.
It's a really that's a really interesting thing, because like that's great that your voice is actually going to travel and have effect on other things going on around you.
Like you don't want to, I don't know, like it's always kind of irritated me whenever you're playing a game and then you just hear like across a field someone just yelling like, "Mom, get me some chocolate milk," or something like this, absolutely out of left field. And it's like, well, kind of apocalypse.
Yeah, no, I hear you, man. I hear you. It's definitely a kind of a feature that I think gets overlooked in a lot of games, is like how VoIP can actually affect your experience more than just being able to talk to your teammates, because we can do that with things like Discord and whatever else. So
right?
what else can you bring?
You could just mute everybody if you wanted in game and just treat it as like a tool. Again, like how you play the game is definitely up to you, and that's something we want to give server providers and players as part of their tool set when they're playing the game.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting that you mentioned that it functions like all other sound, because there was something that we saw in the vlogs, which was that it travels, so the environment around it affects the actual VoIP, and by that I mean like you get like echoes and things like that, right? So things are going to be quieter when you're inside buildings, and things will echo slightly. That's right, isn't it?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Awesome. I really look forward to that, because that's, again, I think it's those little things that add to the kind of like immersion aspects, like again, it's with VoIP systems, some of them are really good. Some of them, you know, when you're speaking over a radio or something, it has a radio effect. In other games, you know, you'll be stood next to someone who's talking and it just sounds like they're talking to you on Discord. There's no like extra effect there at all, and it sometimes kind of breaks the, I guess, that
you know, don't get me wrong, like there's a purpose to that. So when a game developer does something like a non-spatialized VoIP, it's because of compression and network compression. So for example, in a first-person shooter, it may be more immersive to actually have, you know, your teammates talking to you from their point of view, but it's also going to be, you know, it might have some more network effects. In Dead Matter, we've taken very, 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 very careful steps to reduce the amount of network load for VoIP. Like I remember we found a bug right before the recent vlog, right? I worked on the VoIP system for it, and we had essentially, it turned out that the VoIP was not compressed at all. So there was no compression on the audio going in or out. So we ended up having like, you know, lag spikes of something like 1 megabyte per second of voice data being transferred. And it was awful, but no, we've definitely, you know, we've optimized the crap out of it. Everything's compressed, everything's, you know, quantized. It's all very, very efficient.
That's awesome. I noticed that there's a lot of that going on, and we'll come to that later. And by that I mean like optimization.
Sure.
And we'll come to that later. But amazing that I'm seeing you guys putting such a heavy focus on it.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So now, personally, with a survival game, I think one of the biggest things a player looks for is ambience and immersion, and we've just kind of touched on that briefly. We already know that you've worked with the Soundscapes in Dead Matter. Can you tell me a little bit about what that means and how it will affect the kind of the general ambience of the game whilst we're traveling the world?
Well, I think that sound is definitely like it's an important indicator of like tone and mood. Sound design is sort of overlooked in a lot of games as sort of a secondary thing that you add on at the end. But I do think that, you know, to set an appropriate ambience, like if you want a frightening scene versus a calm scene, having like, you know, higher pitched noises or drones, they can cause stress to the player, and that's sometimes what you want, especially when it's, you know, a condition of you want to stress out the player while they're in combat. You want them to find somewhere safe, so you can kind of indicate that with different soundscapes and different soundscape effects.
Sure.
Our soundscape system, I guess it's a little bit different from prior games that I've worked on or that I've seen. They can be layered, they can be blended together. They're very fluid compared to some other systems. So you can have like a bathroom ambience inside of a house, inside of a forest or whatever, which makes it a lot easier for our level designers and our narrative designers to actually set up when it comes to these tense or not tense sequences.
I love that. I really do. I think the way that sound differs, just in general, is such a key thing. And I noticed like little things, from like light sources buzzing to like you say, when you're in like a bathroom or something, sound just interacting differently. And I think that's like such a nice little thing that when we're in the world, we'll be able to travel around. And I think I may genuinely want to use the VoIP system, which I can't say for a lot of like games out there. You know what I mean? Like I can't say I want to with a lot of games, but
yeah, well, you know, like I said, we're all about the immersion when it comes to something like this. And if it comes down to like making details super, super finely, you know, maybe nobody's ever going to see this and nobody's actually going to, you know, notice the differences we make with the VoIP system or the soundscapes. But in the end, it all comes down to, you know, making the game even that much more fun.
Sure. And I think it really does affect like people's experience, regardless of whether they notice it or not. Sometimes there's so many small things that you just don't spot or add to the experience, which is a huge thing. And it's all those little things that come together to make the overall project. Yep. So yeah, I think that's really interesting to learn about. One of the things you guys have done so well as developers is pulling the best aspects of some other games and making it your own. Were there any other games that have inspired your work personally?
Well, I think that definitely Project Zomboid, right? Like that was the granddaddy of them all. Like I remember when I was 13 or something like that, I convinced my dad to buy me it. But yeah, it was just amazing. Like specifically, I think what was amazing about it was the they were relying more on survival and
Hmm.
survivalism more so than sort of like a guns out sort of horror game, right? It was scary because you could go from house to house, but when you were bitten, something would happen, right?
Absolutely.
If the power goes out, you're screwed. If you're out of supplies, you're just out of supplies. Stuff like that, like just like a hardline approach to survival is something that game has brought to the table that I think we're definitely trying to bring aspects of for Dead Matter.
Absolutely. And I think in terms of survival games, it was very different to the traditional kind of graphic style too, but it
Oh,
still
sure.
somehow found a way to really make you feel on edge
Yeah,
all the time. Like from when you would, like you say, when you were checking a house, and it would only take one zombie to come out of like a blind spot that your character couldn't see and bite you for you to
exactly.
be that was it. And I think like aspects like that really show that there are several things that game designers can do without having the most amazing graphics but just general things out there that they can do to really 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 make you feel like you're connected to that character.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
Project Zomboid is such a good game. I've mentioned this in a couple of interviews before, but I always remember being in university and in halls, and during the week we would have like pretty bad internet because everyone else was there on campus and using the internet. So me and one of my I guess hallmates, he had like a shitty laptop and I had my gaming computer. So he'd come and chill in my room, and we'd just both boot up like Project Zomboid and go on like a local network game and just play
Sure.
Project Zomboid just endlessly for hours. And it was just one of those that you could sink so much time into.
And I
I
think the
loved it.
reason for that is just they put in detail into the entire world, right? You can burn
Hmm.
down walls. You can take down a wall, walk through, grab something from the cupboard. You can put things in cupboards. You can, like the entire world is so well detailed in that game that I think that's
Hmm.
something that we definitely want to bring out with the World of Dead.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how that affects it. One of the things that I really liked from like one of the recent vlogs was the way that we can actually cover windows.
Yeah,
Not just like your traditional, hey, let's board this up with wood, but hey, let's put newspaper over this so that we can shut out the light so that we don't attract zombies, which is
sure.
like an amazing feature. I love that.
And
So,
you have to make sure that the lights are off, right? So your silhouette's not there. Like there's so many like little details that we're trying to get in. They're not all going to be there for closed alpha. Like we're going to get as much
of
as we
course.
can, but I think that like in the long run, at least by beta, we're going to have so many different interaction methods and ways that these systems are all going to come together, be them zombies or the house or the weather or anything like.
Yeah, and it seems every time I have one of these interviews as well, it feels like I'm learning something new as well, and I get even more excited because I find something and I'm like, I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Now
it's
I'm even
going to be
more
fun.
excited. Now I want to see the next vlog, and I want to see this, and oh man, it just keeps renewing my interest in it, and all these new things coming out. And I think I speak for everyone when I say that that's happening, and
Awesome.
it's great. I'm really looking forward to it. So, next thing I wanted to talk about, could you tell me a little bit more about how the weather system will work in Dead Matter and how this will affect the playable character in particular?
Sure. So that was actually one of the first things I worked on when Nick brought me on. Um, Essentially, it's completely realistic. So, in a lot of other games, you'll see like weather has states. So you'll have it's clear, and then it starts raining, and then it goes clear, and then it's snowing. Ours is essentially using environmental dynamic data to actually generate clouds, to generate humidity, air pressure, the whole nine yards. It takes all of this data using a little bit of noise and actual Calgary data that I actually had to download, and generates weather at any point in time during the game. So um, the weather system, it's completely realistic. Um,
It's
you
crazy.
can have stuff like freezing rain. You can have snow that turns into rain based on the dew point at ground level. I really went
No
overboard with it,
way.
but
That's nuts.
yeah, it's quite good. In terms of affecting the character, I guess like temperature and weather, they're just hazards on the player. So Alberta can get really really cold and it can get really really hot depending on the time of year.
Sure.
So, you can be soaked or dehydrated, depending on what kind of weather it is. If it's foggy, it'll restrict your visibility, and that sort of thing. The weather system is going to affect buildings. So, stuff like open windows will cause the weather outside to sort of leach inside and affect the temperature of the house you're in.
Oh, that's really cool. Okay.
We're really going the extra mile with the realism on it, just because it's something that we can afford to do.
Right.
I had to read something like, for 2 days I was just reading meteorology and like trying to figure out like how does fog work? Is that it turns out fog's just a cloud that forms at ground level. But yeah, like it was a lot of fun to work on and a lot of fun to make. And you're going to see there's going to be a ton of effects that weather affect when it comes to your character's health and mobility and that sort of thing. That's more of Vicka's expertise because she designed more of like the effects kind of aspect. But yeah, it's a completely real weather system.
I haven't even spoken to Vitka yet. I don't think, apart from maybe in the general Discord channels. Yeah, I might need to share a message and see if I can speak to her about things like this. But that's really cool. Like, that's blown my mind because like I didn't know that was a thing, and that's literally just what I was talking about. Like I always find something new in these interviews that take me off guard.
Oh yeah, like I said, we're doing like crazy details with this sort of thing, and the reason being that it will pay off in the end. Like we don't want you to say like, oh, it's winter, it's gonna snow. We want to have like, just like in real life, we want to have like, the occasional warm weekend of winter where the ground's going to freeze, right? It's going to rain and then that's going to freeze over and it'll be slippery. We want the whole 9 yards.
That's nuts. I love that. I think it's just kind of come to my head that I'm like, okay, so if I'm out foraging or whatever I'm doing for like 2 to 3 days, I'm going to have to worry about things like leaving my window open and stuff to come back to. Because like if I leave the window open when it's warm and the weather changes, and then I come home when my character is cold, and it's cold outside. If I've left the window open, the house is going to be cold. I love that. That's like a really, really interesting feature that I don't think we've seen in potentially any other.
Indoors might not always dry you off, right? If you get wet somehow, like it rains out or you fall in some water, you might run back to your house to try and warm up, but that might not necessarily help as long like if the house isn't warm, right? There's all sorts of different features in the whole in the design of the weather system.
I love that because I think now I'm gonna make a little bit of a distant comparison here, but I think games that allow you to walk in the character's shoes and live in a very realistic world create like the best possible immersion for the experience, right? So things like, for example, I think Star Citizen is a good example. So like being able to get up out of your ship and interact with all of the things in the ship around you, even if they're not particularly useful in any way, really just adds to that experience. And I think being able to come home to your house in Deadmare and having to worry about all these little things and interacting with the windows, the lights, the whatever else.
Well, there's this disconnect too, right? Like between art and sort of gameplay that I see in a lot of games, and it's not necessarily like it's completely understandable, right? You don't always have the budget as like a team of game devs to make the fully realized vision of like what you want to make a reality. So you'll see stuff like in games that it might rain, but it's not going to affect you. It's just sort of like a presentational, like here's this extra, it adds to immersion, right? It looks nice, but it doesn't actually do anything. Whereas in Dead Matter, we want like literally everything you see to affect you.
It's crazy. I love it. I can't wait for that. I'm going to be one of those people that is just worrying about the base I have all the time, because I do that. And people hate me when I play survival games with them because I'm that person that has to label every storage box and has to sort it all into the right place. And if you throw something in the wrong container,
absolutely,
that's your head. That's your head. So I think with regards to little things like that, I'm gonna be so OCD with that stuff. I'm so excited. It's gonna be great.
Still running.
Exactly. That's it. And I just know that we're going to have some really funny stories to tell years down the line of people doing exactly that, right? Teammates that you brought into your base, leaving the stove on, leaving the window open, all this other stuff.
It's just burnt down.
Exactly. I can't wait. It's going to be great. I'm so excited. So moving on from that, I think the user interface is something that I see discussed quite heavily, especially kind of in my YouTube comments, and comparing it to other games like Escape from Tarkov, particularly with the inventory. And I just kind of wanted to, I guess, field this with you. Was this something you drew from during your work for this system, the UI?
So I actually didn't work on the inventory. That's more of Nick's project. But so if there was any Tarkov inspiration, you'd have to ask him. But that being said,
sure.
Most of our UI is based on UX principles, right? Like, I'm coming from a web background where UX designers are sort of the norm to have at any agency or company. And the idea is that you're trying to get a visual communication language that's set out so that the users understand what they're doing. It needs to be, information needs to be very accessible, and information needs to be presented in a way that the user can understand at as fast as possible, in a glance. So we're using the most communicative methods that we can. So if we want to show you, for example, like, I don't know, your left arm's broken.
Sure.
We have two methods of doing that. We can tell you the text, your left arm is broken, like with 20 other things that say like, you're feeling okay, your right arm is okay, blah, blah, blah. Or we could show it on a body diagram, and that's typically, that's now sort of a more classic way to do things in survival games. But it's not necessarily because all of these games are copying each other. It's because it's the literal best way we can communicate this information.
Awesome.
So if there are similarities to Tarkov, it's not because we're just, we don't play Tarkov and think, oh, here's this feature that we need to have in Dead Matter, because that's a great way to make a really crappy knockoff game. But we are trying to push the genre here. So if there are overlaps in the UI, that's pretty much because it's good UI design.
Yeah, I think this goes back to you guys being able to identify things that work well and not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but being able to use what is a good system already and fine tweak it to an even better system.
And if it's not a good system, we do prototype our stuff that we make. We will develop little test scenarios for them and make sure that everything's working well. And if it doesn't work, right, like if we try making, I don't know, some new door system or something like that doesn't work that well, we're going to take it out and we're going to put in like a more classic one or a more refined one. And I feel like we're trying to avoid sort of the copying DayZ sort of survival gameism, right? Where like if DayZ has it, we have to have it kind of thing. It's not super great for making a good game, and in part I think that's why Project Zomboid was as good as it gets. Going back to that, because with Project Zomboid, their game was completely original. They weren't copying anything at all. Like they were copying little bits and pieces like inventory systems or health on your character or something like that. But as a game, it was completely original, and that's also what we're trying to do here. Yeah,
I love that. It's definitely something that I think you could talk about for ages with like a general community of people that have played like survival games everywhere, because everybody's got a different opinion on the way things are presented and which games have done it best. And I think like generally speaking, creating an original experience is just you need to do it. You need to do it in order to.
Sorry, tropes exist for a reason, right? There are reasons that we do things like, for example, have a grid-based inventory because it makes more physical sense than just a number. Or like with grid-based inventories, for example, we get the ability to have containers that reveal themselves to you as if you were searching. You have the ability to have, just quick organization of your inventory. So if you want to put all the ammo in one corner, you can do that sort of thing. So it's stuff like that is just sort of like just good principles we're trying to use that actually make sense in the context of Dead Matter.
Yeah. I think for a survival game that particular aspect is really important. Like making sure that your looting experience is rewarding and exciting when you find something new. And like you say, having that grid system allowing you to reveal objects is.
And I mean, we're doing a bunch of different looting systems too. Like we have a few algorithms that we've written that are kind of interesting. They're for loot generation and spawning and that sort of thing, and finding new loot. We're trying something that I don't think a lot of games have tried to do or have done poorly. But yeah, we have some surprises in stock for that.
Oh, okay. All right.
Can't really tell them
I
right
see.
now. But
Yep. Casting the hook, seeing if I take the bait. I get it. That's fine. No, I'm really looking forward to it, man. It's every time I take these interviews, it's like I get more and more hyped for it. I think generally speaking, you guys know exactly what to tell us and exactly what not to tell us to kind of just make sure that the information is coming to us by the time that, you know, it's
something like
it's
that,
ready.
yeah.
It's ready, I guess, and the community can kind of give their thoughts on it. And I guess at this point in time in the video, if anybody isn't part of the Dead Matter Discord yet, absolutely need to go and do that, because it is an amazing source of info. If you end up backing the game, you get access to all these sneak peek channels as well, where you can see things that the devs are cooking up.
Yes, indeed.
And obviously, you get to speak to people like Disseminate, Gunslinger, Nick, Reggie, Hank, whoever it may be, about everything there is Dead Matter, really. Any questions you have, anything like that. So I'll leave a link for that in the description, like I always do. And yeah, I suppose we'll move on to our next question. So,
sure.
In all survival games, resources are something that we have to manage as players, particularly games like Project Zomboid, like we were talking about earlier. I realize in Dead Matter, we're also going to have resource flows, which can affect how we play. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about that for everybody watching?
Sure, yeah. So I guess I'm writing it, but it's mostly done. It's the electrical and water and gas sort of system, the resource flows in the game. It's a pretty complex system as is right now. Essentially, if you don't know what those are right now, it's where we want a line to run from power plants or generators or anything to terminals like lights or appliances. And we want the whole thing in between to be interactive, so you can turn off the power plant if you want and see what happens. Or you can break a junction box halfway between the power plant and a neighborhood, and then see the neighborhood black out. Or you can turn it off and on, destroy it, whatever you want. So I don't know, if you destroy all of the junction boxes on the entire grid, somehow, if you were really dedicated, you could we want everything connected to the grid to then go out, and we want different sources of power, that sort of thing. It's pretty large right now. Like in a game like Fallout 4, where you build settlements, you can have generators and you can wire those to terminals, and if there's a connection somewhere, it works, which is great for something on a small scale like Fallout, or like Fallout settlements. But we have to make sure this whole thing works across the entire map without any lag over, 25, 30, 50 kilometers squared. It's a hard problem to tackle from a computer science perspective. But I think we've actually got something working for that. I remember I had to dust off my old algorithms textbook and look for something that could actually solve this problem.
Oh, wow.
And I eventually had to tweak a few things, but it works pretty well.
Yeah, I think I remember one of my other interviews I did with Shirk back in the day was an amazing kind of like eye-opening experience. Most of these interviews usually go on for about maybe 40 to 50 minutes. Spent almost an hour and a half speaking to Shirk, and one of the biggest sections was about this, like how the world is going to be so interactable. And I love the fact that we're going to be able to just have that, I guess, thought process going in our head. Like, if we want to go and, let's say, attack someone that we know lives in this particular area of the town, you have all these things coming into play. You have weather. Like, do I want to siege his house under these conditions, or do I want to wait for nightfall? Do I want to wait for fog so that I can get closer? All these things. And then you bring into the concept of power and being able to, like you say, destroy a junction box as well. And it's just the possibilities are endless at this point.
You could, if you wanted to get in his house, then all you need to do really is wait for night, disable any junction boxes that lead up to his house, and then just walk right in. It's completely dark, right? The abilities that a system like this affords to you are just, I really have no idea what players are going to do, and I think that's awesome. Like we're setting up all these scenarios such that you can, maybe you want to cause a brownout, you can do that. Maybe you want to turn off someone's water just to mess with them. You can do whatever you want. And I'm excited to see how the community uses these sort of emergent gameplay scenarios to their advantage.
I think
I really have no idea what you guys are going to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting thing though, because like in so many games, the PvP is so straightforward, right? The PvP is always okay. We're gonna go kill them. In a game like Dead Matter, it's gonna turn into okay, well, these guys might be a little bit stronger than we are, and we're not ready to take them on yet. So let's weaken them. Let's take out their power. Let's turn off their water supply. Let's try and, I don't know, run scavenging runs in their area to try and take their resources away. Things like that.
Yeah.
And it's just, there's so many like little things going into it, again, that are going to make this overall experience so much more in depth. And I love that. So,
and in a game where, you know, everything's interactable, we have to make sure that we let you actually meaningfully interact with things. Like, it's one thing to have, you know, you can open any doors, right, or something like that, or you can jump through windows. It only matters if that actually does something. So if a zombie actually just waits outside your window and doesn't go in your house for some reason, that would be a bug. But we have to make sure that windows actually make sense as an escape route. We have to make sure windows make sense as a temperature control system. We have to make sure that everything works well with this sort of system. And I think that with the power system and the water system and everything, that's as much of a system as any other.
Yeah. That's awesome. I think there's a really good way of looking at it. It's like all these systems interacting together to create kind of, I guess, give the player so many options, but also give them things to worry about, which is really cool. Awesome. I look forward to that. So we said we'd kind of touch on it later. Optimization, huge part of every game, and I think sometimes even the downfall of some games, lack of optimization, especially those with a large scale and detailed map like Dead Matters. So can you give me, I guess, a couple of examples with regards to optimizations that you've made in the past, and would you say that this is a big focus for you and the team?
It is one of the biggest focuses we have. I remember actually a couple days ago there was a gameplay stream when like a lot of people were looking at the game and thinking, oh my god, they can't network anything, how are they going to make an open world game, there's a ton of rubber banding and all this. And I remember just thinking, like, while I was watching this, I know that's not the networking because we fixed that animation bug weeks ago, but you know, optimizations that we make are so strong. Like, I've never actually, with Gary's mod, you network things by basically just sending messages between the server and the client. So to not make it too technical, it's more sort of like, I don't know, you literally send chat messages between the server and the client. So we had a limited bandwidth to work with because Gary's mod isn't great for networking. You can't send entire files over, you know, downstream or anything like that. You have to sort of break it up, and you have to do these weird optimizations that you might not think of to get things to run. And Nick and myself and Gunn, we've been hard at work with this sort of thing. Like, one thing that we did was Nick's network pooling system. So I remember I watched your interview with him, and he kind of understated it. He said something like, yeah, I've been working on, you know, replication relays and blah, blah, blah. But, like, he didn't actually elaborate on that. But we found stuff like, you know, take lights in a hotel, right? There might be 64 lights in this hotel, right? And they all have their on or off state. So they can be on or off, and that has to be transmitted across the network to everyone who can potentially see these lights.
Sure.
Nick actually, with this system, he managed to compress pretty much any data type we want with up to 32 times compression. So those 64 lights have the network load of about 2 lights in any other game.
Wow.
It's stuff incredible. Like this. Like, the networking, I think a car or vehicles in general in Dead Matter have about the network load of like a door. Like, it's we're really going hard with that sort of thing because we know that there are a lot of different people that are going to be playing Dead Matter, and they all have different types of systems and different types of internet connections, and we're trying to make everything just as smooth as possible.
Sure. I think I'm gonna say something I think may be controversial about one of my favorite games ever, which is Escape from Tarkov. But it's been renowned in the past for just not being well optimized in so many ways, and just not being able to get like high frame rates, you know, having desync between players, things like that, like network problems. There's
a ton of different ways that we're trying to fix problems like that. Like, for example, with FPS issues, One thing we do is that we have essentially it's like Fallout or the new Fallout. So if you're playing Fallout and you, I don't know, you move to a new part of the map, you might see it kind of spawn in. What Fallout's doing is it's basically just kind of it's unloading any of the levels you've been through, and then just loading the new ones. And it looks like a big open world, but we don't have that whole thing loaded at the same time.
Sure.
We're doing something like that, except we're taking it a step further, and we're basically doing that for buildings as well, or at least detailed buildings. So, for example, if you're outside of a hotel and you don't have a scoped weapon like a sniper or something, and you're not looking for any windows, we have the ability to unload the interiors of the hotel, right? Just to save on those extra frames per second. So we've designed these systems from the ground up to actually be optimized and to not, cause any extra load that they shouldn't or that they don't need to.
Awesome. Yeah, I think a lot of players are going to be very happy to hear that, because like I've said, like I think the community that you're working with perhaps might have a bad experience with some other games.
Yeah, absolutely. We have too, right? Like, although we're still devs, we do play games like Escape from Tarkov and whatnot, and we are aware of like bugs like this that kind of plague the whole thing. We're every team meeting that we have, we're thinking like, is this as good as it could be? Is there more work we can do on this? Can we make this run better? And so on and so forth.
That's awesome. It's
like
really good to hear that.
I've never actually been below 60 frames per second, I don't think, in testing. So it definitely runs quite nice.
Oh, now you're speaking my language. That's awesome, because like I have a 144 hertz monitor, and I think with some games out there, you don't, especially with I guess early access games, is sometimes you just don't get the capability to get there. Do you know what I mean? You could be running like an absolutely beast computer and just not
promising 60 frames per second at all places. I'm hoping for 60 frames per second, and I'm doing everything in my power to get to 60 frames per second. But again, we won't know until the final.
Sure. I can completely understand that. So, I guess the last thing that I wanted to ask you, Disseminate, is what kind of survivor are you going to be when Dead Matter comes around?
A homeowner. That's it.
That's it.
Different meeting after the apocalypse, but yeah, I want to be a homeowner, so I'm going to fortify a house. I want to outfit it with turrets, barbed wire, the whole 9 yards, maybe make a community. We'll see what happens.
Crazy. So basically, I guess at that point, you're not just a homeowner, you potentially a settlement owner.
A base owner. There you go.
Base owner. Okay. So it's going to be interesting. So you're going to be like, that's related to something. You're going to be like Morgan in The Walking Dead when he manages to just barricade himself inside an entire town and booby trap the entire thing.
That's going to be the dream.
Oh, okay. Right. I'm going to have to keep an eye out for your town then when I'm walking around. If I see a sign saying Disseminate's town, I'm just going to keep walking and go somewhere else.
Please do.
All right, Disseminate, thank you very much for speaking to me. It was my pleasure.
Well, thank you for having me.
And really looking forward to it. Is there anything that you kind of wanted to say, any last messages or anything like that you wanted to put out to the community?
Not really. Get excited for June. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah. No, I definitely I'm definitely on board with that one. So thank you very much, and I will speak to you again soon, no doubt.
Thank you. Talk to you later.